Hey, welcome back. Before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone disagreed with you, but they said it so gently that you almost didn't notice? Or maybe the opposite happened. Someone sounded like they agreed with everything you said, but later you realize they actually had doubts the whole time, and they just never said it directly. If that has ever happened to you, then today's lesson is going to feel like someone finally turned the lights on in a dark room. I'm Alex, and this is English in Fluency, the place where we take real, everyday English and slow it down just enough so you can actually grab it and use it yourself. Today, we're going to talk about something that native speakers do all the time without even thinking about it, and that is signaling disagreement and doubt in a polite way. We're going to learn how people soften a contradiction, how they hint that they're not fully convinced, and how you can follow these little signals so you're never confused again when someone says yes, but clearly means maybe. Stick with me through this one, because by the end, you're going to hear English conversations completely differently. You're going to start noticing these small words and phrases everywhere, in movies, in meetings, in casual chats with friends, and you're going to understand what's really being said underneath the surface. Let me start with a story, because I think stories make this stuff stick so much better than just listing rules. So picture this. There's a small design studio in a mid-sized city, the kind of place with big windows, a coffee machine that's always a little broken, and 3 or 4 people who spend all day arguing about fonts and colors in the nicest possible way. One of the people who works there is named Renata. Renata has been at the studio for about 4 years. She's calm, she thinks before she speaks, and she has a habit of disagreeing with people in the softest way you can imagine. So soft that sometimes people don't even realize they've been disagreed with until an hour later. The other person in our story is Dario, who joined the studio about 8 months ago. Dario is enthusiastic, quick, and full of ideas, but he's still learning how this particular office works, how people talk to each other, and how disagreement sounds when it's dressed up in polite English. One afternoon, Dario walks into the meeting room with a big smile and a folder full of sketches. He's been working on a new logo for a client, a small bakery that wants something warm and friendly. He spreads the sketches on the table and says, "I really think we should go with the bright orange version. It just feels alive. It feels like fresh bread coming out of the oven." Renata looks at the sketches for a moment, tilts her head slightly, and says, "I see what you're going for, and I like the energy. But I wonder if the orange might be a bit much for their brand." Now stop right there for a second, because this is exactly the kind of sentence we need to break down together. Renata didn't say no. She didn't say, "I disagree." She didn't even say, "I don't like it." What she did was much more subtle, and honestly, much more common in real English conversations than a flat no ever is. Notice the structure. She starts with something positive. "I see what you're going for, and I like the energy." This is what we call a softener. It's a way of showing the other person that you heard them, that you respect their idea, before you say anything that might feel like a contradiction. Then comes the small word that changes everything, but. That single word, but, is one of the most important disagreement signals in the entire English language, and once you start listening for it, you will hear it constantly. Whenever someone says something nice and then follows it with "but," get ready, because a gentle disagreement or a doubt is coming right after it. After the "but," Renata doesn't say, "I think it's wrong." She says, "I wonder if the orange might be a bit much." Listen to how careful that sentence is. I wonder if. That's a doubt marker. It's a way of raising a concern without stating it as a fact. And then might be another softener. Might is one of those small modal verbs that takes the sharp edge off a statement. She could have said the orange is too much, which sounds direct and a little harsh. Instead, she said the orange might be a bit much, which sounds like a gentle suggestion, almost like she's thinking out loud rather than correcting him. Now here's where I want you to pause this and try something with me. Say this sentence out loud, slowly, the way Renata said it. I see what you're going for, and I like the energy, but I wonder if the orange might be a bit much for their brand. Try to notice how your voice naturally softens on the second half of the sentence. Try it again, maybe even a little slower this time, paying attention to the rhythm. This kind of sentence pattern, agree first, then but, then a soft doubt, is something you're going to use constantly once you start speaking more advanced English, especially in situations where you need to disagree with a boss, a colleague, a friend, or even a family member without creating tension. Back to our story. Dario, still smiling, but a little less certain now, says, "Oh, you think it's too bright?" Renata shakes her head slightly and says, "Not too bright exactly. More like, I'm just not sure it matches the calm feeling they mentioned wanting." Did you catch that? Not too bright exactly. She's correcting his interpretation of what she said, but even that correction is soft. She's not saying you misunderstood me. She's rephrasing gently, adjusting the meaning without making him feel like he got it wrong. Then she adds, more like, I'm just not sure. That phrase, I'm just not sure, is one of the purest doubt signals in English. It doesn't say, I know you're wrong. It says, I have uncertainty, which invites more conversation rather than shutting the idea down completely. Dario leans back in his chair and thinks for a second. Then he says, "Okay, so what if we kept the shape, but toned down the color? Maybe a softer orange, almost like a peach?" Renata's face changes. You can see she likes this better, and she says, "That's actually interesting. I could see that working, though I'd still want to check it against their existing signage before we commit." Now, here's another beautiful example. That's actually interesting. I could see that working. This sounds like agreement, and honestly, it mostly is. But notice the word, though, at the end, and the phrase, before we commit. Even when Renata agrees, she leaves a small door open for doubt. Though I'd still want to check it. That's a polite way of saying, I'm not 100% sure yet. I need more information. This is incredibly common in English, especially in professional settings. People rarely give 100% full agreement right away. They agree, but they leave a little space for more thinking, more checking, more discussion. Let's pause the story here for a second, because I want to give you a chance to practice recognizing these patterns without me explaining every single one. I'm going to say 4 short lines, and after each one, I want you to think, in your own head or out loud, whether the speaker is showing full agreement, gentle disagreement, or doubt. Ready? Here's the first one. That could work, but let's think about it a bit more. Did you catch it? There's a but in there, followed by, Let's think about it a bit more, which is doubt, not full agreement. Here's the second line. Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking. No, but here, no hesitation. This is full, real agreement. Third line. Maybe. I'm not totally convinced, though. This one is full of doubt signals. At the start. Maybe. Not totally convinced. And, though, at the end. Fourth line. Yeah, that sounds right to me. Simple, direct, full agreement, no hedging at all. See how different these sound once you know what to listen for? The words but, though, maybe, not totally, not sure, I wonder. These are your signal words. Whenever they show up, your brain should immediately think, something is being softened here. There's a hesitation. There's a partial disagreement happening. Let's go back to the studio. A few days pass, and the bakery logo project moves forward with the softer peach color that Dario suggested. But now a new situation comes up. There's another co-worker at the studio, an older man named Felix, who has worked there for over a decade and has very strong opinions about typography, especially about which fonts feel warm and which fonts feel cold. Felix walks past Dario's desk, glances at the new logo on the screen, and says, interesting choice of font there. Now, if you're a beginner in English, you might think, oh, he said interesting. That's a compliment, right? But if you've spent any real time around native English speakers, especially in a workplace setting, you probably felt something else in that sentence. That little pause before interesting, that sound, is often a doubt signal all by itself. In fact, in spoken English, a simple followed by a pause, followed by a comment, is one of the classic patterns for polite disagreement or doubt. It's like clearing your throat before saying something you're not fully comfortable saying directly. Dario, still learning these signals, takes it at face value and says, "Thanks. I thought it gave it a nice handwritten feel." Felix nods slowly and says, "It does, definitely. I just, I wonder if it might be a little hard to read at a small size, like on a business card." There it is again. I just, I wonder if. Notice how similar this pattern is to what Renata said earlier in the story. This tells you something important. Once you learn a handful of these polite disagreement patterns, you start recognizing them everywhere, because English speakers reuse the same small set of tools again and again. It does, definitely. That's full agreement about the font style. Then I just, which signals a small addition or a small concern is coming. Then, another pause. Then I wonder if it might be the double softener, wonder plus might, showing real hesitation and doubt about the readability. Dario, now getting a little more confident with reading these signals because he's been paying attention, says, "Oh, you think it won't be readable small?" Felix says, "Maybe not unreadable, but definitely trickier, especially in print." Let's zoom in on maybe not unreadable, but definitely trickier. This is such a common structure in English. Maybe not X, but Y. It rejects the extreme version of a statement, unreadable, while still keeping the core doubt alive, trickier. This is a very typical way that English speakers avoid sounding too negative or too harsh, while still expressing a real concern. Let's take a short break from the story again, because I want to introduce a few more useful phrases that show up constantly in real conversations when people are politely disagreeing or expressing doubt. And I want you to say them out loud with me, slowly, focusing on the rhythm and the softness in the voice. First phrase, I'm not entirely convinced. Say that with me. I'm not entirely convinced. This phrase is used when someone wants to express doubt without shutting down the conversation completely. Second phrase, I see your point, but. Say it with me. I see your point, but. This phrase acknowledges the other person's idea before gently disagreeing. Third phrase, that's fair, although. Say it with me. That's fair, although. This one agrees with part of the idea while adding a condition or a concern. Fourth phrase, I hear what you're saying, however. Say it with me. I hear what you're saying, however. This is a slightly more formal version, often used in meetings or serious discussions. Fifth phrase, part of me agrees, but. Say it with me. Part of me agrees, but. This shows a mix of agreement and doubt at the same time, which is incredibly natural and human, because honestly, we rarely feel 100% about anything. Try using one of these in your own sentence right now. Pause for a second and think of something you slightly disagree with. Maybe a movie everyone loves, but you don't really enjoy, or a food that's popular, but you think is overrated. Now build a sentence using one of the phrases we just practiced. For example, I hear what you're saying. However, I've never really understood why that movie is so popular. Or, that's fair, although I still think the ending felt a bit rushed. See how natural that sounds? You're not being rude. You're not causing conflict. But you're clearly expressing your real opinion. And that's exactly the skill we're building today. Let's return to the studio one more time, because there's one more layer to this lesson that I really want you to catch, and that's about tone of voice and rising intonation, not just the words themselves. Later that week, the whole team gathers for a bigger meeting with the studio's founder, a woman named Corinne, who built the business from nothing over 15 years and has very strong instincts about what works and what doesn't. Corinne looks at the finished bakery logo on the big screen and says, "So, this is the final version." Now, here's something important. That sentence, "This is the final version," if said with falling intonation, going down at the end, sounds like a simple confirmation, like she's just checking a fact. But if it's said with rising intonation, going up at the end, especially on the word final, it can actually signal doubt, almost like she's silently asking, "Are you sure about this? Is this really the best we can do?" In our story, Corinne says it with that slight rise, that little questioning lift in her voice, and everyone in the room, even without more words, understands that she has some hesitation. Renata, who has worked with Corinne for years and knows exactly how to read her tone, jumps in and says, "We think so, though we're definitely open to another round of feedback if you feel something's missing." Notice how Renata doesn't wait for Corinne to explicitly say, "I have doubts." She hears the tone, she reads the small rising intonation, and she responds to that unspoken doubt directly, using the phrase, "though we're definitely open to," which invites more honest feedback rather than forcing a false agreement. This is such an advanced listening skill, being able to hear doubt not just in words, but in the shape of someone's voice. And it's something that even confident English learners often miss, because they're so focused on individual words that they forget to listen to the music of the sentence, the rise and fall, the pauses, the little breaths before a hesitant comment. Corinne then says, "I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But something about the spacing between the letters feels a little tight." Listen to how many doubt signals are packed into that one sentence. "I don't know. That phrase alone signals uncertainty. Maybe it's just me. That's a way of softening a criticism by suggesting it might be a personal preference rather than an objective fact, even if the speaker actually believes it strongly. But our familiar disagreement word. Something about a vague phrase used when someone senses a problem but hasn't fully defined it yet. Feels a little tight. Feels is a very soft verb here, much gentler than saying the spacing is wrong. All of these small choices work together to create a comment that expresses real doubt while staying incredibly polite and non-confrontational. Dario, watching all of this, starts to realize something. In English, especially in professional or social settings, direct disagreement is actually pretty rare. Most disagreement is wrapped in layers of softening language, hesitation markers, rising intonation, and vague phrasing. And if you don't know how to unwrap these layers, you might completely miss that someone disagrees with you at all. You might walk away from a meeting thinking everyone loved your idea, when really, half the room had serious doubts they never stated directly. Let's pause again for some practice, because I think this is a perfect moment to test your ear. I'm going to describe 4 short situations, and I want you to imagine the tone of voice as you think through them. First situation, someone says, "Sure, that could work," with a flat, quick tone, almost immediately after you finish speaking. This usually signals genuine, simple agreement, especially if there's no pause and no hedging words. Second situation, someone says, "Sure, that could work," but they pause for 2 or 3 seconds before saying it, and their voice rises slightly on the word could. This almost always signals hidden doubt, even though the words themselves look identical to the first situation. This is exactly why tone and pacing matter just as much as vocabulary, sometimes even more. Third situation, someone responds instantly with, "Yes, definitely, let's do that," in a warm, steady voice. This is confident, real agreement. Fourth situation, someone says, "Yes, I guess so," with a slower pace and a slight sigh before speaking. "I guess so" is one of the clearest doubt phrases in casual English. It basically means, I'm agreeing because I don't want to argue, but I'm not fully convinced. Now here's a fun little practice moment. I want you to say 4 sentences out loud, and I want you to intentionally play with your tone to match the meaning. First, say "sure." That works with a flat, confident tone, like you really mean it. Now say the exact same words, "sure," that works, but add a pause before it and let your voice rise slightly at the end, like you have a hidden doubt. Notice how just changing your voice changes the entire meaning of the same 3 words. This is something a lot of learners miss, because in many other languages, tone doesn't shift meaning quite as dramatically as it does in English, especially in these soft disagreement situations. Let's go back to our studio story one final time to wrap up the lesson with a nice, clear resolution, because I always like these stories to feel complete, not just like a pile of grammar examples. After Corinne mentions the tight letter spacing, the whole team gathers around the screen. Dario, feeling a little nervous but wanting to practice speaking up more clearly, says, "I hear what everyone's saying, and I think adjusting the spacing could really help. Should we try loosening it just a touch and see how it feels?" Renata smiles and says, "Yeah, let's try that. I think that could solve it." Felix, still cautious about the font size question from earlier, adds, "Agreed." And maybe we increase the size just slightly for the print version too, just to be safe. Corinne watches the small trial adjustments happen live on the screen, tilts her head, and this time says, "Yes, that's much better." With clear, falling intonation, no rise, no hesitation, just simple, warm agreement. And just like that, the whole team relaxes, because they can all hear the difference between her earlier uncertain tone and this final, confident one. This story shows you something really important about how disagreement and doubt work in real English conversations. They're rarely loud, rarely direct, and rarely aggressive. They live in small words like but, though, maybe, and however. They live in phrases like, "I wonder if," "I'm not entirely convinced," and "I guess so." And just as much, they live in the voice itself, in pauses, in slight rises at the end of a sentence, in a hesitant before a comment. Once you train your ear to catch all of these small signals together, the words and the music of the voice, you're going to understand so much more of what's actually happening in a conversation, even when nobody says the word disagree out loud. Now let's slow down for a moment and go through a clear, simple summary of the tools we picked up today, but I want to do this in a natural, spoken way rather than a dry list, because I want these to feel like tools you can grab immediately in real conversation. First, remember the pattern of softener plus but. Something like, "I like the idea, but," or "that makes sense, but." This lets you agree a little before disagreeing a little, which feels much more natural than jumping straight into a contradiction. Second, remember phrases built around wonder and might, like, "I wonder if that might be a bit much," or "I wonder if we should double-check that." These phrases raise a concern gently, as a thought rather than a fact. Third, remember phrases that show partial doubt, like, "I'm not entirely convinced," "I'm not totally sure," or "part of me agrees." But these let you express real uncertainty without sounding negative or difficult. Fourth, remember how tone changes meaning. A rising pitch at the end of a sentence that sounds like a statement can actually be hiding a question or a doubt. A pause before speaking, especially after a small often means a gentle disagreement is coming. Fifth, remember phrases that soften an outright rejection into something more discussable, like maybe not X, but definitely Y, which lets you say no to an extreme version of an idea while still keeping part of the idea alive. Let's do one more round of practice before we finish. And this time, I want you to build your own full response using several of the tools we learned today. Not just one phrase, but a mix of them, just like Renata and Felix did in our story. Here's the situation. Imagine a friend tells you they want to quit their stable job to travel around the world for a year with almost no savings. You're a little worried about this plan, but you don't want to sound negative or crush their excitement. Take a moment and try building a response out loud. Here's an example of what that might sound like, using our tools. "I hear you, and honestly, that sounds like an incredible experience. But I wonder if it might be a good idea to save a bit more first, just so you're not stressed the whole trip. I'm not saying don't do it. I just think a little more planning could make the whole thing even better." Listen to how many of our tools are working together in that one response. "I hear you," an opening softener. That sounds like an incredible experience, genuine positive acknowledgement. But our key disagreement signal. I wonder if it might be our gentle doubt structure. I'm not saying don't do it. a clarifying phrase that prevents the listener from feeling fully rejected. I just think, a soft way to introduce your real opinion. This is exactly the kind of layered, human, natural sentence that real English speakers build automatically. And now you have the pieces to build it too. Try building your own version now, using a different situation from your own life. Maybe someone at work suggested an idea you have doubts about, or a family member mentioned a plan you're not fully sure of. Say your response out loud, slowly, and try to include at least one softener, one but or however, and one gentle doubt phrase like I wonder if, or I'm not entirely sure. The more you practice building these sentences yourself, rather than just listening to mine, the faster this pattern becomes automatic in your own speech, not just something you understand when you hear it. Before we close out today's episode, I want to remind you why this specific skill matters so much, beyond just passing a test or sounding fancy. In real life, in real relationships, at work, with friends, with family, most disagreement doesn't come wrapped in big dramatic arguments. It comes in these small, quiet moments. A before a comment, a but after a compliment, a slight rise in someone's voice at the end of a sentence. If you can't catch these signals, you might miss important feedback. You might misunderstand how someone really feels about your idea. Or you might accidentally seem too blunt or too harsh when you're trying to express your own doubts, simply because you don't know these softer tools yet. But now you do. Now you know how to listen for but, though, however, and maybe. Now you know how to listen for wonder, and might, and not entirely sure. Now you know that tone matters just as much as words, and that a pause can say as much as a full sentence. I really want you to take this lesson and use it this week, not just in your head, but in real conversations, even small ones. Next time you slightly disagree with someone, try building a sentence with a softener, a but, and a gentle doubt phrase, instead of just staying quiet or blurting out a flat no. And next time you're listening to someone else speak English, whether it's in a show, a podcast, or a real conversation, try to catch these little signals: the pause, the the rising tone, the small, maybe hidden in the middle of a sentence. I promise you, once you start noticing them, you won't be able to stop noticing them. And that's actually a wonderful thing, because it means your ear for English is becoming sharper every single day. Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to take you somewhere different, away from the design studio, because disagreement and doubt don't just show up at work. They show up at dinner tables, in group chats, on phone calls with old friends, and especially in families, where people know each other so well that a single raised eyebrow can carry an entire argument. So let's shift the scene for a bit, and let's meet two new people. There's a woman named Bianca, who's in her late 20s, practical, a little stubborn, but always trying to be fair when she talks to people she loves. And there's her older brother, Theodore, who's a bit more impulsive, always chasing the next big idea, and who genuinely believes that most problems in life get solved by just being brave enough to try. The two of them are sitting at their parents' kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, a pot of coffee between them, and Theodore has just announced that he wants to leave his steady job at an accounting firm to open a small food truck selling grilled sandwiches. Bianca's first reaction is a long pause. Not a word, just a pause, a few seconds where she looks at him, then looks down at her coffee, then looks back up. That pause itself, remember, is already a signal. In real conversations, a pause before a response, especially after exciting news, often means the listener is choosing their words carefully because they have some doubt they don't want to blurt out too fast. Finally, Bianca says, "Okay, wow, that's definitely a big decision." Notice the repeated word there. That's. This kind of small repetition, a stutter almost, is another very natural doubt signal in spoken English. People often repeat a small word like that or so when they're buying themselves a second or two to figure out how to phrase something honestly but kindly. Theodore, full of energy, says, "I know, right? I've already looked at a few used trucks, and I think I could get everything set up within 2 months." Bianca nods slowly and says, "I love that you're excited about this. I really do. But can I ask you something, just to think it through together?" There it is again, our familiar friend, but right after a warm, supportive sentence. And notice the phrase that follows it. Can I ask you something, just to think it through together? This is a wonderful, gentle way to introduce doubt without sounding critical at all. Instead of saying, "I think this is risky," she invites a shared thinking process which feels much more like teamwork than judgment. Theodore says, "Sure, go for it." Bianca continues, "Have you thought about what happens if the first few months are slow? Like, financially? I'm not saying it won't work. I just want to make sure you've got a plan B, just in case." Let's slow down on this sentence because it's loaded with useful tools. Have you thought about? This is a classic way to raise a doubt in the form of a question rather than a direct statement. It feels less like criticism and more like genuine curiosity. I'm not saying it won't work. This is a clarifying phrase, almost identical in function to the one Dario used earlier in our first story. It protects the listener from feeling like their whole idea is being rejected. I just want to make sure, another softener, just makes the request feel smaller, less demanding. Just in case, a phrase that frames the doubt as precaution rather than pessimism. Theodore pauses for a moment, and this time it's his turn to hesitate. And he says, "Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. But I guess I could put some savings aside first, just to be safe." Guess, there it is, one of our doubt markers again, this time used by Theodore himself as he admits uncertainty about his own plan. Notice how natural this feels in the conversation. Doubt isn't just something one person expresses about another person's idea. It's something we constantly express about our own thoughts, too. Especially when we're thinking out loud in the middle of a conversation. Bianca smiles and says, "Yeah, that makes sense to me. I do think the sandwich idea is genuinely great. By the way, I've tasted your cooking my whole life." Notice something important here. No but, no however, just clean, direct agreement. I do think, followed by genuinely great. This is Bianca's way of showing that her earlier doubt wasn't about rejecting the whole idea. It was about one specific part of the plan, the financial safety net. This is such an important lesson about disagreement in English. It's rarely about rejecting an entire idea. It's usually about specific pieces of it. And skilled speakers know how to separate what they agree with from what they're still unsure about. Let's pause the story here and practice a few more useful phrases together. Phrases that are slightly different from what we practiced earlier, so we can build an even bigger toolbox. Say this with me, slowly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but say it again. correct me if I'm wrong, but. This phrase is fantastic because it invites the other person to correct you, which makes your doubt or disagreement feel humble and open rather than confident and confrontational. Here's another one. It's not that I disagree, it's just. Say it with me. It's not that I disagree, it's just. This phrase draws a clear line between full disagreement, which it denies, and a smaller specific concern, which it introduces gently. Here's a third one. I could be wrong, but. Say it with me. I could be wrong, but. This one is short, humble, and incredibly common in casual English conversation, especially among friends. Here's a fourth phrase, slightly more common in spoken, informal English. No offense, but. Say it with me. No offense, but. Now, this one is interesting because it directly signals that a slightly blunt or critical comment is about to follow, and the speaker wants to soften the potential sting of it in advance. Here's a fifth one, often used to introduce a personal doubt gently. To be honest, I have some reservations. Say it with me. To be honest, I have some reservations. This phrase is a little more formal, and it's especially useful in situations like job interviews, business discussions, or serious personal conversations. Try building a sentence with one of these 5 new phrases right now. Think of something in your own life. Maybe a friend's plan you're not fully sure about, or a decision at work you have mixed feelings on. Say your sentence out loud. For example, you might say, "No offense, but I really don't think that color works for the living room." Or, "To be honest, I have some reservations about switching banks right now." Notice how each of these sentences lets you speak your real opinion honestly, but wrapped in a way that respects the other person's feelings. Let's go back to Bianca and Theodore's kitchen table for a moment, because I want to show you one more layer of this conversation. The layer of body language mixed with tone. Because in real life, disagreement and doubt aren't only heard, they're also seen. And even though this is a listening lesson, understanding what usually goes along with these phrases will help you recognize the feeling of doubt even faster. As Bianca says, "I'm not saying it won't work." She tilts her head slightly and softens her eyebrows. A very typical physical signal that goes along with gentle doubt in English-speaking cultures. As Theodore says, "Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead." He rubs the back of his neck, a common gesture that often appears when someone is admitting uncertainty or slight embarrassment. These physical patterns often travel together with the vocal patterns we've been studying, the pause, the rising tone, the and recognizing all of them together. The words, the tone, and even the small physical cues, if you can see the person, will make you incredibly skilled at reading real conversations, not just textbook ones. Later that evening, their mother, a warm but very direct woman named Ilonka, joins the conversation after hearing the general idea from Bianca in the kitchen. Ilonka is from an older generation, and her communication style is a little more blunt, though still polite in her own way. She sits down, listens for a minute, and then says, "A food truck. That's a lot of hours on your feet, you know, more than a desk job. I just want you to be ready for that part, not just the exciting part." Notice how Ilonka's doubt sounds slightly different in tone from Bianca's. It's a little more direct, a little less wrapped in wondering and softeners, but it still ends with a clear, caring intention. "I just want you to be ready." This shows you something valuable. Not everyone expresses doubt the exact same way. Some people use heavier softening, full of wonder, and maybe and might, while others, often older speakers or people from more direct communication backgrounds, use fewer softening words, but still keep a warm, caring tone. Both styles exist in English, and being able to recognize doubt in both the heavily softened version and the more direct version will make you flexible enough to understand almost anyone. Theodore listens to his mother, nods slowly, and says, "Yeah, I know it won't be easy, but I think I need to try it. Otherwise, I'll always wonder what if." Ilonka looks at him for a long moment, then smiles and says, "All right then. Let's figure out the details together." See that moment. All right then. That's a clear signal of accepted agreement, even if some doubt still exists underneath. Sometimes people move from doubt into support once they see genuine commitment and preparation from the other person. And that transition itself, from doubt to support, is a beautiful, very human pattern that shows up again and again in real conversations, not just in this story, but in your own life too. Let's shift gears one more time before we finish today's lesson, because I want to give you a chance to practice recognizing these signals in a slightly faster, more natural rhythm, the way you'd actually hear them in a real conversation, without me slowing everything down and explaining each piece. I'm going to read a short exchange between two co-workers, quickly, almost like a real clip from a meeting, and I want you to simply listen for the disagreement and doubt signals as they fly by. And if you catch yourself missing one, that's okay. Just rewind this part and listen again, because that's exactly how real listening skills get built, through repeated, active listening, not through a single perfect pass. Here's the exchange. Speaker 1 says, "So I was thinking we launch the new pricing next Monday." Speaker 2 says, "Next Monday? That's pretty soon, isn't it?" Speaker 1 says, "Yeah, but I think the team's ready." Speaker 2 says, "I hear you. I just wonder if customer support has had enough time to prepare for the questions that'll come in." Speaker 1 says, "That's fair, actually. I hadn't thought about that side of it." Speaker 2 says, "Maybe we push it to Wednesday, just to give them a buffer." Speaker 1 says, "Yeah, let's do that. That sounds smart. Let's break that down quickly together. Next Monday? That's pretty soon, isn't it? That little tag question at the end, isn't it, is another classic doubt signal in English. It turns a statement into something softer, almost like the speaker is inviting the other person to reconsider without directly criticizing the plan. "I hear you. I just wonder if..." There's our familiar wonder pattern again, showing up in a completely different setting, a business meeting this time, proving just how universal this tool really is across all kinds of English conversations. That's fair, actually. I hadn't thought about that side of it. This is a lovely example of someone accepting a doubt gracefully, shifting from their original plan without feeling attacked, because the doubt was expressed so gently in the first place. Maybe we push it to Wednesday, just to give them a buffer. Maybe our doubt word, used here not to express personal uncertainty, but to gently propose an alternative, a very common and flexible use of the word, maybe, in spoken English. I want you to try repeating that whole short exchange out loud, both roles if you can. First Speaker 1, then Speaker 2, paying close attention to where the tone softens, where the pauses might naturally fall, and where those small doubt words show up. Doing this kind of shadowing practice Saying the words along with the rhythm you imagine a native speaker would use is one of the fastest ways to move these patterns from your understanding into your actual spoken habits. Let's talk for a moment about why all of this matters so much beyond just these stories. Every single day, all over the world, English learners get stuck in a strange trap. They understand the grammar, they know plenty of vocabulary, but they still feel lost in real conversations because real conversations are full of these soft, layered signals that grammar books rarely explain clearly. Someone says something that sounds like agreement, and it's actually mostly doubt. Someone's tone rises just slightly, and suddenly a simple statement becomes a hidden question. If you only listen for individual words and ignore rhythm, pauses, and softening phrases, you'll keep missing half of what's actually happening beneath the surface of a conversation. But now, after everything we've walked through together today, you have real, practical tools. You know the power of but, and however, and though. You know how wonder and might, and maybe work together to soften a concern. You know how repeated words, small hesitations like and pauses before a response often hide a doubt that hasn't been spoken yet. You know that a rising pitch at the end of a sentence can secretly turn a statement into a question, and that a falling, steady tone usually signals genuine, confident agreement. I want to leave you with one more small practice challenge before we close. Something you can carry with you into your actual life this week, not just into this video. The next time you're in a real conversation in English, whether it's with a coworker, a friend, a stranger, or even just watching a show, try to catch one, just one, moment of gentle disagreement or doubt. Notice the words around it. Notice if there's a pause before it. Notice if the person's voice rises slightly at a key moment. And if you feel brave enough, try responding to it in English using one of the phrases we practiced today. Something like, I hear you, but, or I'm not entirely sure, or I could be wrong, but. Even one small moment of real practice like this, repeated over days and weeks, will build your fluency far more than passively watching lessons ever could on its own. Let's take one more quick trip together, because I want you to see these patterns in one final setting. A place where doubt and disagreement show up constantly, but almost nobody notices. And that place is a simple phone call between two old friends. Meet Preeti and Simon, who've known each other since university, now living in different cities, catching up over the phone the way old friends do, jumping between serious topics and silly jokes within the same 5 minutes. Preeti calls Simon one evening, excited, and tells him she's thinking about applying for a big promotion at work, a role that would mean managing a much larger team and a lot more travel. Simon listens, and after a short silence, he says, Okay, so tell me more. What's making you excited about it? Notice something here. Instead of jumping straight into an opinion, Simon asks a clarifying question first. This is actually a really smart, very common way that English speakers buy themselves time before expressing any doubt. They ask more questions, they gather more information, and only then do they respond with their real feelings. Preeti explains the role in detail, mentions the higher salary, the new challenges, the chance to build a bigger team from scratch. Simon says, That does sound exciting. I'm not gonna lie. Then there's a pause, and he adds, Though, can I be honest with you for a second? Preeti says, Of course. Simon says, I just remember how burnt out you were during that last big project. And this role sounds like it might come with even more of that kind of pressure. So I guess I'm just a little worried. That's all. Let's slow down and unpack this one carefully, because it's a beautiful, natural example of doubt, expressed between close friends. That does sound exciting. I'm not gonna lie. Full, genuine, positive reaction first. No hedging at all in that part. Though, can I be honest with you for a second? Here's our familiar though. Again, doing exactly the job we've seen it do throughout this whole lesson, signaling that a more serious, honest comment is about to follow. Can I be honest with you for a second? This phrase is incredibly common among close friends and family. It asks permission before delivering a doubt, which makes the listener feel respected rather than ambushed. I just remember how burnt out you were. This uses a shared memory, a real, specific example from the past, to support the doubt in a caring, grounded way rather than a vague, abstract worry. Might come with even more of that kind of pressure, our familiar softening modal, might, doing its usual gentle work. So I guess I'm just a little worried, that's all. Notice guess again, along with just a little, both softening the strength of the worry. And that's all. A small closing phrase that reassures the listener the doubt isn't bigger or more dramatic than it sounds. Preeti goes quiet for a moment, then says, Yeah, no, that's actually a really fair point. I have been thinking about that too, if I'm honest. Notice, yeah, no, that's actually a really fair point. In casual spoken English, yeah, no. Together like that might look confusing on paper, but it's an extremely common way for someone to first acknowledge what was said. Yeah, before gently confirming they're not simply brushing it off. No, meaning no, I'm not dismissing your concern, followed by genuine agreement. That's actually a really fair point. This little combination, yeah, no, shows up constantly in real, natural spoken English, especially in casual conversations between friends, and it often confuses learners the first few times they hear it. Because logically, yeah and no seem like opposites, but here they're working together as a single, natural discourse marker. Simon, relieved that Preeti didn't feel attacked by his honesty, says, I just want you to go into it with your eyes open. You know, not blindsided like last time. Preeti laughs a little and says, Fair enough. Maybe I'll talk to my manager first about what kind of support I'd actually get before I fully commit. See how the conversation moves naturally from excitement to gentle doubt, to acknowledgement, to a small practical next step, all without a single moment of real conflict or tension. This is exactly what fluent, emotionally intelligent English conversation looks like among people who care about each other. Doubt isn't hidden or ignored, but it's also not delivered as a blunt attack. It's wrapped carefully, delivered with context and care, and received with openness rather than defensiveness. Let's pause here for one more useful round of phrase practice, because I want to make sure you leave today's lesson with an even richer set of tools in your pocket. Say this phrase with me. Can I be honest with you for a second? Say it again, slowly. Can I be honest with you for a second? This phrase is wonderful because it asks for permission before delivering a more direct doubt or concern, which almost always makes the other person more receptive to what follows. Here's another one, very common among friends. I just want you to go in with your eyes open. Say it with me. I just want you to go in with your eyes open. This phrase expresses concern or doubt about a plan, while still respecting the other person's right to make their own choice. Here's a third one. If I'm honest, I have been thinking that too. Say it with me. If I'm honest, I have been thinking that too. This phrase is great for admitting that you secretly share someone else's doubt, even if you hadn't said it out loud before. And here's a fourth phrase that we touched on briefly. But let's really drill it, because it shows up so often. That combination of, yeah, no, say it with me, trying to capture the natural rhythm. Yeah, no, that's actually a really fair point. Practice saying that quickly, the way a real, relaxed conversation would sound, not slowly and separately, but as one smooth little phrase. Now here's a fuller practice challenge for you, one that combines everything from all three of our stories today: the studio, the kitchen table, and this phone call between friends. I want you to imagine a friend of yours tells you they're thinking about moving to a completely new country for a relationship that's only been going on for a few months. You're happy for them, genuinely, but you also have some real doubts about the timing. Try building a full, natural response out loud, using at least 3 of the tools we practiced today. Take a moment. Really try this before continuing. Here's an example of what that fuller response might sound like. That's amazing, honestly. I'm really happy you found someone who makes you feel that way. Can I be honest with you for a second, though? I just wonder if it might be worth waiting a little longer before making such a big move. Not because I doubt your feelings. I just want you to go in with your eyes open, you know? I could be wrong, but a few more months together in the same place might make the whole decision feel even more solid. Listen to how many separate tools are working together there. A warm, genuine compliment first. Then, can I be honest with you for a second? Then, I just wonder if it might be. Then, I just want you to go in with your eyes open. Then, I could be wrong. But this is exactly the kind of rich, layered, natural sentence a fluent English speaker builds automatically. And with enough repetition, you'll start building sentences like this automatically too. Let's talk for a bit about one more small but important detail, something that ties directly into listening practice specifically, since that's really the heart of today's lesson. In real spoken English, many of these doubt and disagreement signals get slightly reduced or blended together in fast, casual speech. For example, I don't know might come out sounding closer to I don't know, especially in casual conversations. I'm not sure might blend into I'm not sure, said quickly, with the words almost running together, sounding more like one soft sound than 3 separate words. I guess so might come out sounding almost like one word. Guess so, especially at a natural conversational speed. This is really important for you to know, because if you're only used to hearing these phrases spoken slowly and clearly, like we've been practicing today, real native speech at full natural speed can suddenly feel much harder to catch, even though it's using the exact same tools we've been learning. My advice, once you feel comfortable with the slower versions we practiced together today, start listening to real, unscripted English content, casual podcasts, interviews, even reality shows, and specifically try to catch these same phrases at their natural, faster speed. You'll be amazed at how quickly your ear adjusts once you already know exactly what you're listening for. Let's also talk briefly about something that trips up a lot of learners: the difference between doubt about an idea and doubt about a person's feelings. These are actually quite different in English, and they use slightly different phrasing. Doubt about an idea often sounds like, "I'm not sure that'll work," or "I wonder if there's a better way to do this." Doubt about someone's feelings, though, especially in caring, close relationships, often sounds softer and more personal, like, "Are you sure you're really okay with this?" Or "I just want to make sure you're not just saying that to make me feel better." Notice how this second kind of doubt focuses on genuine emotional understanding rather than practical problem solving. And it's incredibly common in real conversations between close friends, partners, and family members. So it's worth training your ear to recognize both types separately. One more small, but incredibly useful tool before we move toward wrapping up today's lesson completely. And that's the phrase, "I don't want to sound negative, but..." Say it with me, slowly. I don't want to sound negative, but... This phrase directly acknowledges, out loud, that the speaker is aware their upcoming comment might sound critical. And by naming that risk directly, it actually softens the impact quite a bit. Almost like saying, "I know this might come across a certain way, but please don't take it that way. I still care about you and your idea." You'll hear this phrase constantly in real English conversations, at work, among friends, even in interviews and reviews, so keep your ear open for it from now on. Let's bring everything together now with one final, complete listening challenge, a bit longer than the ones before, so you can really put your new skills to the test all at once. I'm going to read a longer exchange, and I want you to simply listen the whole way through first, without pausing, just letting the natural rhythm wash over you, the same way you'd experience a real conversation. Then, if you want, you can go back and listen a second time, this time actively hunting for every single doubt or disagreement signal you can catch. Here's the exchange. One friend says, "So I was thinking about finally starting that online business I keep talking about." The other friend says, "Oh, nice. Tell me more. What's the plan?" The first friend says, "Well, I'd sell handmade candles. Maybe start with a small website. Nothing too crazy at first." The second friend says, "That sounds fun. Honestly, though, have you looked into how saturated that market already is?" The first friend says, "A little. Yeah, but I think my designs are different enough to stand out." The second friend says, "I hear you. I guess I just wonder if it might take longer than expected to actually turn a profit. That's all. Not trying to discourage you." The first friend says, "No, that's fair. I've read that too, actually. Maybe I'll start it as a side thing first, just to test the waters." The second friend says, "Yeah, that sounds like a really smart way to ease into it." Notice how naturally doubt and disagreement move through that entire exchange without ever once sounding harsh, aggressive, or discouraging. That sounds fun, honestly, though. Have you looked into? Though again, right in its familiar spot, right before a gentle concern. "I hear you. I guess I just wonder if it might take longer, that's all. Not trying to discourage you." Look at how many of our tools are packed into just that one sentence. Guess, wonder, might, that's all. And not trying to discourage you. All working together to deliver a real, honest concern, wrapped in genuine care. "No, that's fair. I've read that too, actually. Maybe I'll start it as a side thing first." And here, the first friend doesn't get defensive at all. They accept the doubt gracefully and immediately shift toward a smarter, safer plan. Exactly the kind of natural, healthy resolution we've seen again and again throughout today's lesson. Before we say goodbye for today, let's take one calm, quiet moment to gather everything we've walked through, not as a dry list, but just as a friendly recap. The kind of thing you might say to yourself in your head after a good class. Today we followed Renata and Dario through a design studio, watching how a soft, but a gentle, I wonder if, and a quiet before a comment can carry a whole disagreement without a single harsh word. We sat at Bianca and Theodore's kitchen table, hearing how a pause, a repeated word, and a caring, however, can hold real worry and real love at the very same time. We listened in on Preeti and Simon's phone call, catching that lovely, strange little combination. Yeah, no, and learning, how can I be honest with you for a second? Opens the door to real honesty without ever slamming it. And just now, we heard two friends talk through a candle business, noticing how guess, wonder, might, and that's all can all show up together in a single caring sentence, wrapped around someone's dream, protecting it rather than crushing it. None of these tools are complicated on their own, but is a tiny word. Might is a tiny word. Guess is a tiny word. Yet together, arranged with care, mixed with a pause here, a rising tone there, a soft before a sentence, they let English speakers say something as delicate as, "I'm honestly a little worried about this," without ever sounding cold. And they let you say the exact same thing too, once you start reaching for these small words on purpose, instead of staying quiet or blurting out a flat no. That's really the whole heart of today's lesson, not memorizing a list, but training your ear, and slowly, your own voice, to notice and use this soft, human, very British and American way, and honestly, just very natural way, of disagreeing gently and doubting kindly. And one very last thought before I let you go. You don't need to use every single phrase we practice today, not tomorrow, not even this month. Just pick one, maybe I wonder if, or that's fair, but, or can I be honest with you for a second, and try it once, in one real conversation this week. Notice how it feels in your mouth. Notice how the other person responds. Notice whether the moment feels softer, kinder, more human than a flat yes or a flat no would have felt. Small, repeated moments like that, one phrase, one real conversation, one small success, are exactly how fluency quietly builds itself over time, far more than any single lesson ever could on its own, including this one. If today's lesson helped you catch these hidden signals a little more clearly, please take a second and hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep building your real, natural English skills together, one honest, practical lesson at a time. If you followed along and practiced some of those phrases out loud with me, even quietly under your breath, give this video a like, because that little bit of speaking practice is exactly what turns passive understanding into active fluency. And I'd genuinely love it if you left a comment below sharing a moment when you noticed someone disagreeing with you so gently that you almost missed it completely. Or a time when you used one of these soft phrases yourself. Your stories help me build even better lessons for you and for everyone else learning alongside you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Keep listening closely. Keep noticing the small words and the small pauses, and keep speaking, even imperfectly, because every single conversation you have is quietly making your English stronger. I'll see you in the next lesson.